Philanthropy Network, Greater Philadelphia, is proud to have developed a wonderful connection with grant makers for effective organizations. GEO knows that grant makers are successful only when grantees achieve meaningful results. So GEO promotes strategies and practices that contribute to grantees' success. They use examples of funders of all types and sizes that are changing practices and working collaboratively with one another and with grantees to bring about better conditions in their communities. As part of our Giving with Impact series, GEO has presented workshops for Philanthropy Network members on building nonprofit capacity to evaluate and grow impact and strategic co-funding models. On the strength of this relationship, Kathleen Enright, GEO's CEO for 12 years, accepted the invitation to speak with us today. That she agreed to fly back and forth to Philadelphia from her hometown of Chicago and accepted this invitation when GEO has its own sold-out conference in DC next week, speaks volumes to our relationship, and we thank her for that. GEO has done great thinking and writing about what it means to be a network, something that's obviously very relevant to Philanthropy Network. GEO sees the potential and power of networks to grow the impact that we have as funders and nonprofits if we adopt a network mindset and try new practices. I know that the board and members of Philanthropy Network are committed to seizing that opportunity, so let's welcome Kathleen Enright.
Well, thanks so much, Bill, for that kind introduction. And Debbie, it's a pleasure to be here with you and with your team. I hope all of you know how very well served you are in this region by Debbie and Philanthropy Network. I travel around the country a lot with various regional associations, and Philanthropy Network has always been, well, DVG and now Philanthropy Network has always been highly regarded and very strong. So I'm also very pleased to be here with you because I just love being in rooms where these connections are being made, where action is happening. I heard of a little story where money got put on the table in a room. So some of the sparks that were flying are actually going to be funded. Maybe the revolution will be funded. I don't know. So it's wonderful to be here with all of you, and frankly, part of the reason I like it so much is that I'm a philanthropy and nonprofit geek. I will read anything that I can get my hands on that talk about trends in the nonprofit sector or how we can do our work a bit better. And frankly, I'm a little depressed because have you noticed how most of these articles start off with doom and gloom? You know, it's all the resources are very restricted and you know, things are so very tough out there. And of course, the challenges are immense. And the hill we have to climb is pretty tall. But I don't see doom and gloom, especially not when you're in a room like this. I see enormous reasons for hope. Stanford, one of those reasons for hope this morning. My goodness, if guys like that are leading our nonprofit organizations, I think they're on our side. We're being well served. It's a great choice. Well, so over the course of GEO's past 4 years of work, we have been connecting up with nonprofits across this country who are achieving enormous things despite the restricted conditions, despite the fact that the challenges are pretty extreme. And they're doing this by aggressively sharing their knowledge with others. They're working with and through networks, so they're transferring their skills to other groups if they think that those groups could use them. Or they're banding together to advocate for public policy change. And so what do all of these activities have in common? First of all, they focus on growing impact, not on growing organizations. And secondly, they're collaborative. Now, at GEO, as Bill mentioned, we focus on the changes that grant makers have the power to make that will ultimately help nonprofits the most. And when it comes to supporting collective action, we have some work to do in philanthropy. And it's incredibly important work, because our success, our ability to make progress on these big, thorny challenges absolutely hinges on our ability to act together. So let's face it though, folks, partnerships are hard. They can be incredibly stressful. They can be frustrating, but they can also be powerful, even transformational. You know, I want you all to start actually by thinking about some sort of partnership or collaboration that you were in. It can be one that just took flight, where everything was clicking, or it can be one where everybody was really frustrated and they wanted to kind of take their ball and go home. Do you have one in mind? Yeah? Is everyone thinking of something? So what do you think distinguishes those collaborations that never get liftoff from those that really soar? I want you to take a quick second, turn to the person next to you and tell them what you think. What's the key ingredient to partnerships that really soar? The question was to talk about what makes them soar, and I'm really interested to see whether our experience resonates with yours, but for us it boils down to three things, and it's those three things I want to talk to you about today. First and foremost, it's leaders who put the mission ahead of their own egos or organizations. Yeah, what a powerful and all too rare characteristic that is. But frankly, we've all heard of collaborations breaking down over turf or ego, but our sector can't afford it. That is not the work that we're in. Frankly, a few times a year, I guest lecture at Northwestern University in a class for nonprofits. And so every year, these bright young faces, I'm thinking, this is the future of our sector. And so I ask them, well, what do you want to do when you graduate? And they say, I want to start a nonprofit. They don't say they want to make certain every poor kid gets a great education. They don't say they want to defend healthcare as a human right. They say they want to found something, and it doesn't really matter what. So if we're going to make progress as a sector, we got to turn that on its head. We as social sector leaders have to be willing and interested in contributing to something that's bigger than ourselves. And we have to be willing to do it without ever seeing our names in lights or getting specific credit. Now, we need leaders who are willing to play down their individual power and prestige and promote shared power and prestige. Collective action. This is a form of leadership that some people call facilitative or collaborative or collective. I think it's what Robert Gardner talked about as servant leadership. We were just talking, we've been working with Ashoka over the past 4 years, and Ashoka Fellows have this awesome phrase for it. They call these people the evangelist in chief. Because they're not just focusing on their own institution and what they need, they're focusing on the work, and they're out there in the world building connections with the people that they need to connect with to move the work forward. So this is incredibly important because this is the kind of leadership that our sector needs most, and we have it. We just need to lift it up and amplify it. So that's one thing that we as Philanthropy can do. We can find those leaders who consistently put the mission ahead of their own need, their own ego, and lift them up and reward them for that. Leaders like Daryl Hammond at Kaboom. Does anyone know Kaboom or Daryl? He spoke at the GEO conference last March, and I'm just inspired by his way of thinking. So Kaboom is this great, successful organization, but Daryl doesn't want to be the biggest ship in the sea. He wants to be surrounded by a vast fleet of ships, all moving in the same direction. That's why Daryl will support the success of organizations that some folks might call his competitors. And he'll even steer money their way because that might be the best way to make certain that every kid has a safe place to play. Now, wouldn't it be great if we all acted like that? Actually, I'm not the right group for that $100,000 grant. They are over there because they're doing work with the right constituency to get that done. That is pretty incredible. So we as foundations also need to think about ways that we can act with the mission first rather than our egos or organizations first. And that's kind of tough. Sometimes it might mean letting go of our quest to directly attribute specific actions to our money and be willing to have just contributed to something bigger without being able to just have that direct attribution. We also might need to be happy giving recognition to others rather than seeking it for ourselves. And I know many of you in this room do this every single day. I actually, we were talking to a group of members just the other week, and the idea of being overly humble was one of the problems because their grantees need them to lift up their voice. So there is sort of a downside of what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about going that far. But it also might mean that we need to make some basic adjustments to our own practices. So when you think about the pace that work is moving, does it always meet our quarterly grant-making cycles? Maybe not. We might need to move faster. We might need to be more nimble in order to be able to do this work. We might need to accept the reporting requirements, accept somebody else's report rather than having our own. These are all very small things. Did someone applaud to that? I know this is a mixed group. Yeah. As a small aside, I always go over really well with groups of nonprofits. So one foundation that's a real example of putting the mission first is the Energy Foundation. And they're probably the biggest foundation that you've never heard of. About 20 years ago, Pew, Rockefeller, and MacArthur foundations wanted to help solve America's energy crisis, but they recognized that they themselves did not have the expertise in-house. So they bounded together with $100 million over 10 years to found the Energy Foundation. And the Energy Foundation's approach is to build the field of energy philanthropy and to support the network of activists that are out there trying to get the good work done. So their intent is to go for a large impact rather than a large infrastructure. And so what that means is that they're spurring the growth of colleague organizations in Latin America and Europe rather than taking on that work themselves. And that when they raise money for their grantees, though Energy Foundation does do grants, they raise and give money, they don't ask that money passes through them. They ask that it goes straight to their grantees because it's really not about them, to be frank. And they also have been giving the long-term support to the advocates who've been working hard to to succeed in changing the way that we think about energy in this country. And it was their network that secured new federal fuel economy standards that are going to take nearly 700 million tons of carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere by 2030. So they are behind-the-scenes actor that's sparking some pretty incredible things. So for those of you who are making a list, the first thing that's important to successful collaboration is leaders who put the mission first. The second one is relationships built on trust. How many of you said that to the person that was sitting next to you as one of the key ingredients? I'm guessing that came up a lot. And there are several examples on this that are just so powerful. As I've learned about the funders who've been supporting the effort of marriage equality in this country, there's something that really distinguishes them. And it is that they paid a lot of attention to building connections and relationships with one another. So when they needed to act quickly, they were able to do it. So Tim Gill of the Gill Foundation, John Stryker from Arcus, several others, they get together on a quarterly basis in the room. These are the donors, not the staff. They also built these connections at the staff level. But they take the time to talk to one another because they all care about the same thing. And they have been collectively leading work that has led to now Illinois is about to become the 15th state in the country with marriage equality. It's a pretty common thing to think when you're about to get into a partnership or a relationship. Can I trust this person? Can I trust the organization that I'm about to work with? But I'd suggest a more important question that we might all ask ourselves is, how can I earn the trust of the people that matter to the work that we're trying to do? Just think about that for a minute. How can I earn the trust? And if we spent more time on that question, it might really steer us in a different direction. So there's a foundation that actually has made strategic investments in building the relationships of trust between nonprofits in their region. And it was in an attempt to try to create a more collaborative region. And they've been doing this for almost 10 years, and they are succeeding. It's the Barr Foundation in Boston. I don't know if many of you have heard of the Barr's Fellows Program, but with the Barr Fellowship Program, they take 12 people out of their organizations for a sabbatical that's 3 months, and they network them together and take them on a travel tour to the Global South, just for part of the sabbatical time. And the sort of strange twist with the Barr Fellows Program is that the fellows are told not to do any work together. They're told to just be together and to just get to know one another. And the stories are pretty profound. You know, there are people who were Barr Fellows together who were previously kind of at odds in the community, and everybody knew that that guy didn't like that lady or whatever. But after this experience, they knew each other at a human level, and those organizational barriers got kind of taken down. And the results have been pretty striking. Barr Fellows have pulled together to open the first bilingual high school in the city of Boston. They collaborated to get a successful planning grant for the Promised Neighborhoods program. I mean, there's just a whole host of things that they've been able to do. So Barr invested in building relationships before they were needed. And that's another, one of those great arguments for trust and relationship building. It actually enables resilience. Have any of you read the book by Andrew Zolli called Resilience? He spoke at GEO's conference, and there's this whole theme in there about creating the network that then activates when the need arises. I mean, just think about Sandy. What if Red Cross, FEMA, Catholic Charities, all of those groups hadn't really gotten together at the table until the day after the storm struck? What chaos that would have been. But they were well networked in the lead up to it. So trusting and being trustworthy is the second key component to collaboration. And it's kind of like a rainy day fund. They need to be built before you need them. So the final key component I want to talk about is one that requires a bit of a personal disclosure of a failing in my own leadership. So I have been running GEO, as Bill said, for 12 years now, and I've always been clear that we're operating in a bit of a fishbowl. After all, our middle name is effective. So if we are not models of effectiveness ourselves, we have no credibility, right? We have no credibility on the issues. So we don't get everything right. Clearly, we do not get everything right, but we work really hard at having our actions and our words line up. But until very recently, I was caught in the exact same trap that most nonprofit leaders find themselves in related to collaboration. And that is that in my heart and soul, I value collaboration. I know it's important. But I hadn't made the institutional changes I needed to make it a priority. And do you know what the institutional changes that I needed to make to prioritize this kind of work? I had to build in organizational slack. And what I mean by that is breathing room. Most folks in the nonprofit sector are doing 3 jobs, not 1, not 2. And when is it that you get to go out and just meet up with the people in the organization that needs to be aligned with yours to build a relationship? Well, that is not something that gets pulled to the front burner. That's way, way, way on the back burner. But it's incredibly important. So I and my staff colleagues are going to hold ourselves accountable to building the relationships with our colleague organizations, the other ships in the fleet that are moving in the same direction as GEO, because their success moves GEO's agenda forward. And I know how unbelievably lucky we are to be able to do it. And I have to say, it took 12 years to get us to the place where we're able to do it. And actually, if you look carefully at the highest performing nonprofits that you know of, my guess is that they've found a way to figure this out too. That they've found a way to open up the space to be able to innovate and to build the relationships that they need to be able to do their work in a powerful way. Now, for GEO, I don't exactly know where this is going to lead, and I have to say I'm very proud to have a board of directors that's willing to kind of lean into this and not really know what the outcomes are going to be, but I know whatever, it's going to be good. So how can grant makers help create the space for nonprofits to innovate, to learn, to collaborate, to adapt to changes? The only way is if they have access to significant streams of unrestricted dollars. Everything over our 12-year history at GEO, whatever way you slice the content, leads back to that statement. It leads back to the fact that, leaders can more easily put aside their petty squabbles and lift up and focus on the work if they've got the flexibility to do that. They can spend time building relationships. For GEO, our flexible dollars comes in the form of general operating support from about a dozen funders, and then membership dues from our community of about 450. So it's fantastic to be able to have this kind of flexibility. The good news is, and I have to say, just talking to a couple people in the room, Philly seems like it's headed in a great direction. More and more foundations are picking up this way of operating. The Philadelphia Foundation, 7 or 8 years ago, focused its discretionary dollars on general operating support. I've just learned that the Patricia Kind Foundation primarily does general operating support. Clineal, Cybert just made a change recently. I think some folks from Cybert, where were you guys? And that was based on deep listening to the grantees. If you sit your grantees in a room and say, what do you need that will help you more? If it's not the first thing, it's the second thing they're going to say is flexible dollars. So that is all very, very good news. So if there's one change that philanthropy can make that will help nonprofits not only collaborate, but innovate and learn, it's to give flexible dollars. So I want to tell you a quick story about a creative way, though, that a foundation that's a GEO member found a kind of a back way to help their leaders clear the decks and work on an issue that really matters to their mission. They provide general operating support, but they created something. The Durfee Foundation in LA created something they call the Stanton Fellowship. And I love this concept. They give $75,000 to a leader in the region who is, kind of well-connected, well-respected, some of the best people in their portfolio, and they say, go work on something that you think is important, but you've never had time to do. So it's the clear the decks. What would you do? So my question for you is, what would you do if you had time to clear the decks and work on something important to your organization? What would your best grantees do? I don't know what it is, but I bet you it would be pretty powerful. So we've talked about leaders who put the mission first. We've talked about the importance of trust. And we've talked about the fact that it's difficult to embrace those two things unless you've got flexible dollars. I led this off by saying how hopeful I am. And I hope that all of you are hopeful as well, because there is no end to what we can accomplish together. But it's going to take some conscious work on our own parts. Philanthropy and nonprofits are going to need to do some things differently. For foundations, we can find and support those leaders who consistently put the mission ahead of their own egos or institutions and give them the running room they need to truly soar. So in doing so, we can create a sector where nonprofits are constantly combining their resources with others because it's the best way to serve the people that they serve. And where funders wouldn't possibly consider developing strategy without being connected to the organizations themselves. And where philanthropic funders trust the high-performing people that they're funding enough to give them the flexibility to do what they know is best for the organizations. So I want to close by thanking you all for the incredible work that you do in your communities every day and challenging you to just do a bit more, a bit better on behalf of those that you serve. Thank you. So they have built in some time for questions, and I would love to be in conversation with all of you. I always prefer that. So I think that folks are there mics? There are mics somewhere. They might be coming. I think I can hear you. If you just stand up and ask a question, I will repeat it. There is no one with a question in this room. I've silenced you. Yes, ma'am.
I actually would make a comment.
Please.
I'm Laura Klein, from
So Laura, where are you from again?
Patricia Klein family.
Oh, Patricia Kine Family Foundations.
So thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
But the other piece of what we believe in, and I think it's another important thing, is multi-year grants. It also gives the state flexibility. And one of the other important reasons that I encourage all the funders to do that is otherwise your grantees are spending all their time raising money rather than doing the work. And if you putting the time and energy to say they're doing good work and you've given them that time, give them time to do it and not have to turn around and write another grant.
Hallelujah. I could not agree more. I mean, I was just talking with May Lee Walker from Cliniel, and there's a story I told at a different time that she saw me talk that I'll just say again, which is that so I came to GEO 12 years ago, and the two most important grants we have ever gotten in the history of our organization, and I have to say, this is saying something big because we're coming off of a $5 million initiative over the past 3 years, were two 3-year general operating support grants. At the moment in time, they were each like $300,000 or $400,000. It was not that much money. Oh, I'm sorry. Gaffe. I made a gaffe. That was terrible. Over 3 years, that's like 100 a year. Okay. But it's what has enabled us to be the kind of organization that we want to be, rather than just chasing money. And actually, one of the big things for us, it was people were coming to us like, GEO, you should do this. GEO, you should do that. And it was all this stuff that would have taken us off mission. But heck, if I needed the money, I might have done it. You know, I might have taken those project grants that were not going to be right for us. Other comments or questions? Thank you, Laura. Nancy.
So from your perspective, being in the field now for more than a decade, can you perhaps say what the tipping point has been in the field when you look back over these last 12 years?
Related to operating support or related to anything?
Or anything in philanthropy that you see has been.
Yeah. You know, actually one thing, and I bet you this might resonate with a lot of you, at the moment in time that the economic crisis struck, I was getting nervous because I kept hearing from a lot of foundations that they were thinking about and worrying about the size of their endowments, right? Their endowments were shrinking. And boy, howdy, that's real, and we got to worry about it. But the foundations are not the ones suffering in this context. It's the people on the ground who are losing their jobs, who were in much tougher circumstances. So a shift happened there where there was some leaders in philanthropy that GEO highlighted who turned that conversation around, who leaned in, who started freeing up their dollars, loosening restrictions, giving primarily general operating support, talking to the grantees about what they really needed. And some of that has really carried through. And I think that actually might have been Cybert's story, where they talked about general operating support in part because of the tough economic times. So I think that was a reality check that we're not through. You know, we are still facing some of the challenges that were kicked off in 2008 from the economic crisis. But if we can, you know, sort of a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. We best learn from it and maybe not go back to old practices that aren't as productive. Other questions? We now see mics. I see mics in the room. There's one there. There might be others. Or comments. You know, please don't just think that you have to ask a question. Do you see her in the back? Thank you.
My name is Laura Weinbaum. I work at Project Home. We work in the field of homelessness in Philly. And my question really is, we talk a lot about how solving some of these more complex social issues have to be a public-private partnership. And I'm wondering if you have a couple of examples that you could highlight for us really quickly that draw out, where that has worked really well in other places.
Oh, goodness. Right. That's a great question. And I have to say, we have been very enmeshed in public-private partnerships over the course of the past 4 years. We had a sort of initiative that was connected to the Social Innovation Fund. So we've been supporting the intermediaries of the Social Innovation Fund. And there are places where that has been hugely, enormously powerful. I also have been in where the sausage is getting made. So there are some things about it that were tough. There are some initial things about the way that got structured that were really hard. Good public-private partnership examples are primarily local. There are some great ones in the Chicago region that actually have to do with something near and dear to my heart, which is an effort to loosen up restrictions on overhead that the government grants place. So the Donors Forum in Chicago was working on that alongside of Fiscal Management Associates and a couple others, and they actually worked with the mayor's office and the governor's office to get some changes to how nonprofits can actually formulate their grants so that they get more overhead covered. So that's just on my topic. There are enormous examples going on in housing and in lots of subject areas, content areas. You guys wrestle for the mic. And then you two are the last two ladies, actually. I just looked at my watch. So
in the workshop that I participated in, there were two things about grant makers that I think I'd like you to comment on that have a lot of bearing on the work we do.
One quickly, what's your name, ma'am?
Helen Cunningham from the Fells Fund here in Philadelphia. And one of them is the fear on the part of a lot of foundations and charitable givers to invest in advocacy. And the second is a little smaller issue, but equally important, and that is a lot of the restrictions that foundations put on their staff about being board members at these organizations. And I would say that it's a false proposition, that it's a conflict of interest to be working as a volunteer for something that you might also be funding.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'll take them in reverse order, and I will say first that GEO wouldn't have a board if nobody who funds us could be on our board. So some foundations out there are clearly figuring out workarounds. My job before I came to GEO, which feels like a long time ago now, was at Board Source. So I am a student of governance. I'm very interested in boards and how they function and how that all works. I think the conflict is completely manageable. If you're a teeny foundation, it's hard to have someone else make the decision about the grants to that organization, but that's an easy workaround, and that's what happens with a lot of the folks with GEO is you were my program officer, that's how I got to know you, that's why you're on the board, you're now no longer the program officer for GEO, and someone else makes those